The first bullet shaved chips of ice from the rock inches above the corporal's helmet. He pressed himself deeper behind the low stone wall, chest heaving, lungs burning in the thin air. The snow in front of him spat and jumped under a fresh burst of machine gun fire, each impact a tiny geyser of white. The pass at 3,800 meters was a bowl of noise, rifles cracking, mortars thumping, radios shrieking half-words through static. Midday light, harsh and colorless, blasted off the snow until everything looked bleached and flat, shadows extinguished. "Stay down," someone yelled, voice cracking in the cold, and another mortar round walked closer, the hump and rising whistle swallowed by the next. The shell hit near the stalled convoy on the road. Second vehicle back, just behind the one that already burned. The blast blew a wave of powder across the pass and slammed into the line of low walls the platoon was using as cover. The rock shuddered. Men cursed. One voice didn't get back up into the radio net. Rounds stitched the snow along the edge of the road, pinning the squad that had tried to bound forward. Every time a helmet or shoulder rose beyond knee height, the distant machine guns on the ridges snapped onto it like they'd been waiting. Overhead, the sky was an empty sheet, bleached blue-white, utterly indifferent. Inside a dugout carved into the permafrost and shored with sandbags, a brigadier general leaned over a plastic mapboard that vibrated with each impact. The overhead canvas membrane flapped with pressure waves from closer detonations, sending little puffs of powdered snow down onto the folding table. "Where's my Overwatch?" he demanded, jabbing a gloved finger at the map. "We were promised an Overwatch miracle. I see nothing miraculous happening out there." A trembling lance of static ran through the video feed in front of him. The drone image of the pass, grainy, top-down, half snow, half smoke, glitched, then recovered, black bars tearing through the frame. The camera drifted, tried to correct, then froze again. "Unreliable trash," the general snapped. "We had them in the open on that ridge. Machine guns, mortars, fighting positions. And your wonder drone can't hold a picture?" He turned to the young officer at the comms rack. "And why isn't our sniper dropping those guns?" The lieutenant licked his lips, watching dots move on a tactical display that no longer matched the reality outside. Sergeant Iqbal. Report she has eyes," he said, "but she's requesting clearance for a target off-axis from the engagement. She thinks there's a off-axis." The general stared at him. A fresh blast rattled the dugout. Dust sifted from seams in the overhead timber. "We have trucks burning in the kill zone. We have a platoon pinned in the open. And she's looking at something else." He cut the air with his hand. "Negative. Tell her to prosecute priority threats. Guns first." On the far wall, another screen showed a different view, a telescoping mass camera from the outpost, trying to punch through the glare. It caught hints of muzzle flashes on the upper slopes, sparks of orange against white, and little else. The lieutenant twisted in his chair, keying his mic. "Overwatch, this is Frost Actual. Command denies off-axis. You are to engage machine guns and mortar positions bearing." His words dissolved into noise, swallowed by a grating hiss. The jammer tightened its fist around their frequencies. High above them, away from the clustered buildings and the chaos of the road, Sergeant Mara Iqbal lay fused to the mountain. Her world was a narrow slice of snow, metal, and breath. The ledge beneath her was barely wider than her body. The drop off the edge fell away clean into nothing, down to broken rock and twisted pines far below. She had dug in over the hours, packing snow under and around her until her torso and legs were more drift than human, white ghillie strips blending with rime and rock. Only the long, dark line of the rifle broke the illusion. Her face was still, skin burned red at the cheek where it met her stock. Frost clung to the lashes of her shooting eye. Each inhale was shallow, metered. Each exhale, a slow ribbon of vapor that turned the air in front of her scope to glass before fading. The spotter's mat beside her lay empty. One corner was folded back, the impression of a body still faint under the snow. Near the head of the mat, a smear of frozen brown-red marred the white, then vanished where someone had dragged a shape away downslope. The tripod for the spotting scope lay, snapped, one leg bent at an impossible angle. She tracked past the obvious. If she rolled the magnification back, the view encompassed the pass. The burning lead truck, the blackened figures crouching behind it, the radio mast at the outpost, the flash of outgoing fire from friendly positions trying to claw at shapes on the ridges. Machine guns, mortar flashes, enemy fighters darting between rock outcrops. But she wasn't looking at that. Her scope kept returning to a distant gully past the main engagement, a seam in the mountain that ran perpendicular to the pass. At this distance, it was a subtle cut, half hidden by the curve of the slope and the way the snow had drifted. Even through good glass, even to a practiced eye, it looked like nothing. Mara's finger rested lightly on the trigger guard as she watched the gully's shadow line. Every few seconds, a faint ripple disturbed its smooth white skin, a hint of movement. A flicker of matte fabric breaking the wind's pattern. Once, she caught the brief shimmer of metal, quickly tucked back under a white tarp. Her radio hissed and popped against her ear. Fragments of words bled through, chewed up by interference. Overwatch, say again. Guns bearing 2 and 0, we need. Negative off-axis, engage primaries. Mara's jaw tightened. Her left hand, the one under the forestock, did not move. She blinked once, long and deliberate, dried snow crystals flaking from her lashes. In the command dugout, the lieutenant cupped his headset. "Ma'am, command repeats," he said into his mic, his voice louder than he meant it to be in the small room. "You are directed to engage direct fire threats. Guns and mortars. Off-axis denied." On the speaker, her reply came back warped, but the words were clear enough. "Frost Actual, this is Overwatch. No panic, no raised pitch, just a flat calm that didn't match the screaming in the background. If I take those guns, we still lose the hub. They're not killing us. They're pinning us. Requesting immediate clearance to engage off-axis target at grid." Static swallowed the rest. The lieutenant glanced helplessly at the general. "She's reading too much into it," the general said. "Guns, Lieutenant. Mortars. Not some phantom out there in the snow. Reiterate." He raised his voice. The dugout shook again. Somewhere outside, a man shouted for a medic, voice strangled by pain. "Who's she targeting?" The general demanded, more to the room than the radio. "Who the hell does she think is more important than the guns pounding us?" On the mountain, Mara heard some version of his question through the mush. The actual words didn't matter. The refusal was enough. "I never left the scope." The little shape in the gully, no more than an irregular dark, not against white, shifted. A gloved hand emerged, pale fabric against pale snow, reaching for a case at the figure's side. The case was the only hard edge in that world of curves, a small rectangle that stayed perfectly level no matter how its owner moved. 2 other forms knelt near it, heads together, wires trailing from under the tarp. She counted breaths. 1, 2, 3. Somewhere below and behind her, unseen, another mortar round landed close enough to her old hide to puff a cloud of snow up into the air, tracing where she had been. The echo punched up the rock to her chest. She felt, dimly, the gap beside her where her spotter should have cursed at the near miss, should have been adjusting his range card, calling corrections. That space was as empty as the sky. Her gloved finger slid from the guard to the trigger. The metal felt the same as it always did. Cold. Familiar. Neutral. Order said one thing. The pattern in the snow said another. She exhaled, letting her lungs empty halfway, and broke the shot. Recoil nudged into her shoulder. The report cracked off the rock face and rolled down the slope, lost almost immediately in the greater thunder from the pass. For a suspended instant, just before the bullet reached the gully, the image in her scope seemed to freeze. The hand just above the case, the subtle turn of a head, the suggestion of eyes behind goggles looking up as if sensing something beyond reason. Then the world went black. A slam cut across the invisible film of the story. Battle noise cut out, visuals gone. For a heartbeat, there was only the echo of the rifle shot, rolling around the bowl of the mountains, fading into the high, white silence. That was how it ended. But the story of why that shot mattered Why that moment was the hinge where the line either broke or held started 18 hours earlier, when the pass looked like any other beautiful, cold, forgettable place on the map. 18 hours earlier, the mountains were almost gentle. The wind that swept along the pass had lost its knife edge and settled into something close to a breeze. The snow underfoot squeaked instead of screeched. The sky was genuinely blue for once, streaked with delicate high cloud instead of blank white haze. Soldiers moved through the outpost in slow, practical loops. Two of them swung shovels, clearing the latest overnight accumulation from around parked vehicles and the entrance to the dugouts. Another pair coaxed a diesel generator back to life, their curses turning to smoke in the air. Somewhere unseen, someone banged ice out of a frozen water pipe with muffled, rhythmic thuds. The road that snaked through the pass was narrow and precarious, but in the calm of morning it just looked like a strip of dirty snow with tire tracks, squeezed between towering rock walls stained with frozen melt. Occasional glints of metal, sensor masts, antennae, the corner of a radar dome, broke the natural lines. Beyond the immediate bowl of the pass, the land fell away in a series of ridges and valleys, each more faded than the last until they dissolved into pale gray on the horizon. Far down there, beyond the last fold of the mountains, was the lowland where most people lived and fought and pretended the high places didn't matter. Up here, the high places mattered a lot. Behind the outpost, tucked into a reentrant that gave it some protection from direct fire, sat the early warning relay, a compact cluster of containers studded with dish antennas. Cables snaked over the snow between them like frozen snakes. It hummed faintly to itself, translating wind-carried signals into useful warnings for command centers far away. Above it, the small radar dome rotated lazily, a white blister on the slope. Inside a canvas shelter near the edge of the compound, Mara sat on an ammo crate with her rifle across her knees. The rifle wasn't new. Scratches scarred its metal. The paint on the stock had been worn smooth in places by years of hands and gear. Along the wooden underside, near where the stock met the metal of the action, a row of shallow marks had been carved. They weren't evenly spaced, and they weren't labeled. Some were paired with a second, smaller mark beside them. Some stood alone. Her hands moved over the weapon with the casual intimacy of habit. She broke it open, checked the bore, oiled a stubborn screw, wiped down exposed metal. Snowmelt dripped from the edge of the canvas roof, pattering onto the frozen ground just beyond her boots. She paused now, and then, thumb resting on one of the carved marks, the corner of her mouth tightening, then moved on. Voices approached outside, one brisk and confident, the other pitched higher with the brutal energy of someone still trying to prove he belonged. Mara slid the bolt back into place, closed the rifle, and set it across her lap as the flap opened. The new lieutenant stepped in first, cheeks still rosy from the cold. Behind him came the general, shoulders squared under his parka, a tiny plume of condensation escaping his nostrils with each breath like steam from a locomotive. "Sergeant Iqbal," the lieutenant said. "This is the general I told you about." "Sir, this is our overwatch element." Mara stood, setting the rifle down carefully before straightening. At this altitude, every quick movement tugged at her lungs. She kept it smooth and slow. "Sergeant," the general said, eyes flicking over her, taking in the lean frame, the dark hair braided tight against her skull, the plainness of her kit. His gaze snagged on the carved stock for half a second, then moved on. "I've heard good things about your shooting." "Thank you, sir," she said. "She's solid on the range," the lieutenant added quickly, trying to be helpful. "Keeps her quals way above baseline. She's just, quiet, a little in her own head." He chuckled in a way that asked for agreement. The general didn't chuckle. He gave Mara one more measuring look, lips pressing together, and nodded. "Out here, quiet is fine," he said. "As long as you take the shots that matter. Briefing in 10. I want your eyes on the map." "Yes, sir," Mara said. He left, the canvas flap slapping shut behind him. The lieutenant lingered a moment longer. "Just try not to make it weird," he said in a lower voice. "He's big on aggressive posture. Doesn't love hesitation. You know." Mara looked at him and said nothing. The lieutenant shifted, suddenly aware of the carved marks, the worn metal, the way she barely seemed to blink. "You're good," he muttered, more to fill the silence than anything, and ducked out. In the briefing tent, the air was warmer, heavy with exhaled breath and the smell of instant coffee. A projector hummed, throwing a jittery map onto a makeshift screen. The pass in top-down view, color bands radiating out to show detection ranges and artillery coverage. The Intel NCO spoke in a practiced rhythm. "Enemy activity in the last 72 hours has been limited to small-scale probes," he said, clicking through slides showing grainy night vision stills of small groups of figures testing the outer wire, flashes on distant hillsides. "No large formations detected. We've logged some missing patrol drones on the northern route, likely due to high winds in this corridor." He clicked again, a graph of wind speeds, another slide of weather patterns, all neat and reasonable. Mara stood in the back, helmet resting on the bench beside her, her hair still damp with sweat from a morning climb. The main map didn't hold her attention. Her eyes were on a smaller paper map pinned to the far wall, half obscured by coats and gear. That map showed more contour lines, ridges, gullies. Her gaze traced one particular line, a shallow cut running perpendicular to the pass, just far enough out that the main cameras and patrol routes skimmed past it. It offered concealment, all the way from a distant saddle to a point overlooking the rear of the comms hub. No one mentioned it. The intel briefing moved onto logistics, fuel flow rates, expected resupply windows. The general asked a few crisp questions. The lieutenant took notes, nodding. A couple of squad leaders shuffled their feet, trying to stay awake. Mara watched the little gully line, thinking about angles, about light, about what that cut would look like when the sun cleared the ridgeline. The projector's light flickered across her face. No one saw where she was looking. The mission here was simple on paper. Hold the pass. Protect the early warning relay and comms node that bridged the mountains and the lowlands. Be the eyes and ears that said, in time, that something big was moving so that someone else could do something about it. The last time she had been the eyes and ears, she'd failed. It wasn't written that way in any official report. The language there was clean and passive. Rounds impacted short of intended target. Contributing factors included incomplete grid verification and communication breakdown. The dead didn't get a say in the wording. In her head, it was simpler. She had trusted the list more than what she saw. She'd had a target stack printed on a laminate. Command post, suspected mortar position, suspected ammo cache. She'd seen, through her scope, civilians moving near one of the structures that Intel swore was clear. She'd hesitated, called it in, been told to wait for confirmation, then prosecute. Confirmation had never come. Other fires had gone in. The rounds had walked off the mark, into the place she'd worried about. The blast wave had hers stamped all over it in her mind, regardless of what the paperwork said. Since then, the carved marks on her stock had changed meaning. They weren't kills. They were instances where she'd seen something the list didn't show, moments where paying attention had kept things from getting worse. A private ledger of times she didn't screw it up. After the briefing, she caught up with the lieutenant outside, snow squeaking under her boots. "Sir," she said quietly, "those missing drones on the northern approach. Are we sure it's wind?" He shrugged, breath clouding. "It's what the data suggests." Data didn't show the last fire mission was off, either, she said before she could stop herself. Something flickered behind his eyes. Unease, discomfort, the knowledge of a rumor he wasn't supposed to acknowledge. "The terrain up there is changing," she continued quickly. "Snow bridges collapse. New cornices form. If they were testing a path, they'd do it where we don't look. The gully running off the saddle." She gestured vaguely at the mountains around them. "The one no one else cares about," the lieutenant said, trying to keep it light. "Look, Sarge, I appreciate you thinking like that. I do. But right now, Hire's picture says no mass. Just noise. We can't chase shadows. We have enough real problems." She opened her mouth, then closed it. The last time she had pushed past that point, people had died anyway. Willpower didn't add weight to your words. It just made you look obstinate. "Understood," she said. He clapped her shoulder. "We've got you on Overwatch. That's the important part. If they try anything serious, you'll see it. Just Keep it simple when the general's in the room, yeah? Later, on patrol above the pass, she and her spotter moved slowly along the ridge. The snow up here was less trampled. Wind had sculpted it into ridges and hollows that had nothing to do with the rock beneath. While her spotter, Ortiz, stocky under his layers, breath puffing steadily, checked likely firing positions with his scope, Mara kept her attention on the little things. Tracks. Most of what crossed these slopes belonged to goats, and the few local herders who still came this high. Their trails had a certain logic, paths worn into memory over generations, hugging wind-sheltered lines, cutting around known hazards. The tracks she saw now didn't follow those rules. They zigged when a sensible person would zag. They cut across open bowls where even the goats avoided the exposure. Their spacing was too regular for wandering animals. Ortiz, she said quietly, pointing with her chin. He shifted, glassing where her eyes aimed. He said after a moment. Could be one of ours. There's no record of a patrol up here in the last 3 days, she said. Could be a local kid. People ignore fences, he countered. A local kid doesn't cache supplies behind that rock, she said. He adjusted again. Now he saw it. The unnatural curve of a tarp edge, too smooth under the snow. The faint line where someone had dug and refilled. Heat shimmered from a distant slope beyond it, just enough to ripple the air if you were looking for it. Ortiz sighed. You gonna make me climb up there? She shook her head. Not now. We'll mark it, report it. See what they say. They marked it. They reported it. Back at the outpost, the lieutenant listened, nodded along, and promised to put in the log. The general glanced at the note on his way past the board and kept walking. At dusk, the radar dome twitched. A blip appeared on the scope, small and fast and low to the horizon, riding the line where the mountains met the sky. The operator called it out, tagged it, tried to refine the track. The blip flickered, then disappeared. Probably ground clutter, someone said. Or a bird. At this altitude, birds were rare. Mara was the only one who turned and watched the sky where the blip had been, eyes narrowing as the last light bled out of the day and the first stars came up. That night, in a narrow alcove of the dugout where the noise of the generator and the occasional radio burst were muted, she took out her small device and tapped at its cracked screen. The recording was only 30 seconds long. She knew every sound in it by heart. Overwatch, this is Raven 4. We're not seeing. Hold on. Some things, confirm grid coordinates. We're seeing Civ. A sharp sound like a mic brushing against webbing as someone turned fast. Then a rising roar. Then dead air. She listened to it again. And again. Then she thumbed the file closed, slid the device back into her pocket, and went to sleep for a few hours, gear stacked by the door, rifle within arm's reach. Before the sun broke the ridge, she was moving. The dawn climb was routine for her now. She'd traced and retraced the paths above the pass so many times she could see them in her sleep. Where to kick a step into the crusted snow, where to anchor a crampon, where not to trust a drift. At the high observation point she favored, she settled onto a flat rock, pulled her scope to her eye, and watched as the light changed. From here, she could see the pass and its roads, the outpost and the relay, the radar and the parking area. But her real focus was on how the sun revealed and concealed. At a certain angle, glare blasted off certain snowfields, turning them into blank white sheets, hiding anything that moved across them. At another, the same fields turned gray, texture showing through, small disturbances standing out like bruises. She watched the blind gully, the one no one else marked, and measured how long it stayed invisible from the outpost's main eyes when the sun rose over the opposite ridge. She timed it, lips moving silently. If someone wanted to use that gully to get close, there was a window when they'd be ghosts. She made a note, just for herself. By the time she came down, the outpost was fully awake. Engines idled, men smoked in tight circles. Radio checks crackled through the air. Somewhere beyond the first ridge, thunder rumbled, a long, distant growl that had nothing to do with weather. Hours later, that distant sound would arrive in the form of buried metal and carefully sighted guns. By midday, the resupply convoy was approaching the entrance to the pass. From her overwatch hide, Mara could see them before anyone down in the bowl could. 5 vehicles in a staggered line, frames bouncing over the ruts, exhaust plumes trailing behind like ghostly streamers. Sun flashed off windshields and mirrors. Someone in the back of the third truck had hung a piece of colored cloth in the window, some unit joke or good luck charm that fluttered in the slipstream. The radio chatter was relaxed, edges softened by familiarity. Copy, Frost. We've got pallets of everything you ordered and a few you didn't. Try not to shoot holes in any of it before we get there. Bring coffee, someone else cut in. Real coffee, not that powdered. Laughter, a little too loud in Mara's ear. Down below, the general stood near the dugout entrance, collar up against the cold, binoculars hanging and used around his neck as he watched the convoy come in. The lieutenant hovered behind him, tablet tucked under one arm. Mara scanned the ridges. Her scope swept past the known hardpoints, sandbag positions, carefully dug fighting holes watching the approaches, and lingered on the empty spaces between them. The snow was pristine up there. Too pristine, given the level of probing they'd had this week. She saw nothing she could hang a shot on. No glint, no silhouette. She shifted to the blind gully. The light was at that ugly angle now, glare flattening details, turning the cut into a washed-out slab of white. She knew better than to trust it. She dialed down the magnification, widened her field, watched for a change in the texture of brightness itself. Something nagged at her, a sense of pattern, of lines not aligning. The missing drones, the cached gear, the radar blip, the unfocused probing. It felt like someone making sure of a path. The convoy reached the choke point. The buried charge went off beneath the lead vehicle with a sudden, dense bang that punched up through her chest even at this distance. One moment, the truck was there. The next, it was lifted sideways on a column of snow and dirt and smoke. The front half disappeared in a bloom of fragments and black. The back half slammed back down, a crumpled shape blocking the narrow road. The shockwave rolled out, compressing the air. Even from here, she saw the men behind the truck duck and flinch, hands rising to helmets. For a fraction of a second, the pass was weirdly silent. The explosion had stunned not just ears but voice. Then the machine guns opened. They weren't wild. Long, disciplined bursts raked the road from high, flanking positions. Short violence, checked, adjusted, resumed. They stitched along walls and vehicle hulls, cutting off routes to better cover. The snow kicked and leapt under their passing. Mara rolled her scope, following the fire back to its sources. 2, then 3, then a 4th team, all where a textbook diagram would put them, all dug into hard, icy niches that gave them overlapping lanes. The defenders were in a bowl now, and the enemy on the rim. Mortar thumps reached her a heartbeat after she saw the first flashes on a terrace further out. The rounds arced up, small dots against the sky, then vanished in a glare, then descended like argument-ending punctuation. The first impacts bracketed the convoy and the outpost command area with horrifying precision. Jesus, Ortiz hissed somewhere behind her, though she knew he wasn't there anymore. Her mind supplied his voice anyway, filling an absence. The radios flared to life. Contact, contact, contact. Lead truck is hit. Driver's down. Repeat. Driver is down. Machine guns on the north and west ridges. We are pinned. Mortars, mortars. Then the quality of the sound changed. A low, crawling burr oozed into the background of every transmission. Words fractured, syllables torn off and reassembled in the wrong order. Fros, actu static. Say eat, fire miz. Hello, hello, hello. The enemy jammer had come online. The lieutenant's voice, clear as a bell, just minutes before, now arrived like something spoken underwater. Anyone with clear comms, report. Overwatch. This is Frost Actual. Say. The drone operator in the dugout cursed as his screen froze. The feed from the small quad they'd sent up to hunt the mortar position went pixelated, then black. A moment later, his control pad vibrated and then lay still, its connection icon flashing red. Lost link, he said, throat dry. I think they grabbed it. Outside, the general barked orders that half his people couldn't hear. Get those men off the road. Shift fire to the mortar forks. Where is my overwatch? Mara watched the mortar pattern tighten, walking closer to the dugout and the relay hub, then pulling back, then edging in. It wasn't random. Whoever was calling the fire knew what he was doing. Rounds dropped to drive men out of good cover, then shifted to catch them as they moved, always leaving just enough space to push them where the machine guns could work them. Her scope drifted to the blind gully again. Now that she knew what to look for, the activity there was unmistakable. Figures moved low and fast along the cut, bodies hunched, white oversuits blending with the snow. Black slats of rifles and packs broke the monotony. They paused occasionally at pre-marked points where the gully's walls closed in, checking small devices, conferring briefly. Each pause aligned, in her mind's overlay, with minor shifts in a mortar pattern. That was where the forward observer was. Somewhere along that hidden line, a pair of eyes and a radio were controlling the entire kill box. Her radio crackled in her ear, then stabilized just enough for a voice to lurch through. "Watch, this is Frost. Do you have, on the ridges over—" "This is Overwatch," she said, forcing her voice to stay level. "Multiple machine gun teams and mortars engaged. There's a team moving in the blind gully toward your rear. They're using fire to pin our front line and isolate your position. They're not attriting. They're shaping." Static chewed the last word into nonsense. "Say again, Overwatch." The lieutenant's voice came back. "Gully what?" "Say again your last." "Gully team is going for your eyes," she said. "Command post and relay. They want you alive." Did she say alive? Someone else snapped on the net. Another mortar shell hit close enough to her hide to shower her in pulverized snow. The shock slammed into her left side, jerking the rifle a fraction off target. A second later, a fragment punched through the canvas of the low windbreak she'd set up, ripped through the spotter's abandon mat, and found flesh that wasn't there anymore. In the chaos of that earlier hit, Ortiz had gone down with a cry she still heard in the back of her skull. Medics had dragged him back along the path, his blood hot for a moment before it cooled in the air and the snow drank it. In his absence, the hide felt wrong, unbalanced, a two-person memory forced into a one-person reality. She gritted her teeth, shook off the ringing in her ears, and forced herself to refocus. Down below, vehicles tried to reverse, but the burnout lead truck blocked the narrow section of road. The second truck had tried to swing around, and now sat skewed across the only other viable path, front wheel hanging off an icy shoulder. A squad from the outpost had made a dash for the convoy, thirds bounding, one group moving while the other covered, but the interlocking arcs of machine gun fire had pinned them halfway, bodies sprawled in the open, some behind rocks too small to really help. The jammed net carried only fragments of their calls. 2 Kia, 3 WIA. Bracketing can't. Mara watched the mortar pattern shift again. The rounds weren't concentrating to annihilate. They were corralling, pushing survivors toward the hardened dugouts and the relay hub, forcing them into predictable bubbles of cover. Anyone who broke from those bubbles, anyone who tried to move laterally, got a burst from above. The enemy was not improvising. They were executing a plan written for these exact contours. She tied it together in her head. The prepared caches, the acclimatization at altitude, the missing drones along the north route, the radar blip. None of it random. All of it rehearsal. They didn't want to destroy the relay and the command post. They wanted to take them. Her eyes tracked from the blind gully, where the strike team crept unseen, to a distant ridge that rose behind it, just far enough away to escape the natural funnels of the kill box. From there, a line of sight would cut both across the gully and down onto the jammer rig she now saw partially hidden behind a snow berm, a boxy shape with antennae bristling from the top, cables snaking into rock. Her current hide, built for the nominal threats, could cover the ridges and some of the road, but not the gully and the jammer both. The mountain shape did not care about her job description. Another mortar landed, closer this time, rattling her teeth. Snow seeped into the small gaps in her clothing. The air smelled faintly of explosive and ozone. In her ear, the lieutenant's voice broke through for a second, sharp with fear. "Overwatch, this is Frost. We are losing picture. I need you on those guns now. Repeat, guns and mortars." "That's an order." Her crosshairs rested for a moment on a machine gun crew digging in on a higher ledge. She could take them. It would feel good, clean, righteous. One shot, then another, two shapes falling. Some breathing room for the men below. It would not change the pattern. She rolled her eye back from the scope, just enough to see the world beyond the tube. Her breath came fast and shallow now, less from exertion than from the weight of choice pressing on her ribs. Stay here, obey, and she could chip away at the edges of the kill box. Maybe enough would survive for a story about valiant defense under fire. Maybe the enemy would still walk someone through that gully and into the back of the relay before anyone could stop it. Or she could move. Her gaze went to the distant ridge she'd studied at dawn, the one she'd marked in her mind as the impossible angle. The climb was nasty, exposed, steep, vulnerable to any eyes that cared to look. From there, though, she could see the gully, the jammer, and the mortar terraces all at once. Her old mistake whispered in her ear. Twice as loud were Ortiz's pained yell and the dead cut-off transmission of a teammate months ago. In the dugout, the general's voice was rising. "We hold here or we don't hold at all," he said, stabbing at the map. "We cannot lose this node. Where's that damn sniper? Why is she not answering?" Mara slid her hand along the rifle's fore end, feeling the familiar dings and scratches. Her fingers brushed one of the carved marks. "Sorry, sir," she murmured to no one on the net. "I'm going to make it weird." She reached up, pinched the radio's push-to-talk once. "Frost, this is Overwatch," she said. "Repositioning for full Overwatch on Jammer and Gully. Comms will go dark. When you hear the gap, move." "Overwatch, that is not," the lieutenant started, voice cracking through static. She reached up and flicked the radio off. The battle's noise dropped several levels in her world. Without the squawk, the mountain was all real sound. The distant crack of rifles, the muffled thump of mortars, the snap of a bullet passing close somewhere below. Her own breathing, loud in her skull. Her heart, steady because it had to be. She moved. She scraped snow off herself as quickly as she dared, freeing her legs from their cocoon. The first step away from the hide felt like stepping off a cliff in a different way, leaving the known, the minimally safe, for a slope that promised nothing. She stripped her kit down as she went, shedding anything that wasn't absolutely essential. Extra comfort layers gone. Secondary optic gone. She tightened her belt, checked that she had 4 magazines on her chest, 1 in the rifle. Rangefinder clipped to her vest, its battery indicator already down a bar from the cold. A coil of rope over her shoulder. A couple of energy bars shoved into a pocket. On the move, she crossed open patches of snow that had seemed benign when she'd been lying still. Now they were full of teeth. Machine gun bursts tracked her, lines of churned snow following as someone up there caught the movement of a single, tiny figure against the white. She sprinted in broken lines, legs burning in the thin air, timing her moves with the mortar impacts. When a round hit, the plume of debris and smoke gave her a brief curtain. She used those moments to dash across exposed ground, body low, rifle tight to her chest. Once a round struck so close that the concussion clipped her ankles mid-stride and sent her sliding on her stomach down a short, icy slope. Her rifle skidded ahead, clattering against a rock outcrop with a sound she felt in her bones. She slid to a stop, fingers clawing for purchase. Snow burned against her exposed wrist where her glove had ridden back. For a moment, she lay there, chest heaving, ears ringing, the sky spinning. She crawled to her rifle. The optics housing had cracked where it had taken a hit. A fine line ran across the lens, distorting the world with a faint spiderweb blur. She closed her eyes, let her head thump lightly against the stock once, then opened them again. So, the world had tilted a little. She could tilt with it. From a higher spur, she clambered onto a brief plateau that gave her a wider view of the enemy's structure. Between the boulders, she saw it all more clearly. The jammer rig hunkered behind a shaped berm of snow and rock, cables running to a generator hidden by a camouflage net. A small cluster of men worked there, heads bent, hands moving over equipment. Above them, on a slightly higher terrace, mortar tubes stood in a neat arc, their crews working with mechanical efficiency. A round-in, baseplate thump, adjust, repeat. Fingers of men moved between positions, carrying ammo, relaying messages. They weren't a mob. They were a unit that had done this before. Farther along the ridge, small groups of fighters lay in their machine gun pits, their barrels tracking targets with patient malice. Below, near the relay, she saw a squad try to move the wounded back under hard cover. They were trapped halfway between two lines of fire, crouched behind a rock shelf that gave some protection, but not enough. Their sergeant's voice came faintly through the background hiss on her still-off radio, like the ghost of something she chose to hear anyway. "We can't hold here. Need that corridor." She checked the sky. The clouds had thickened while she moved. High, thin wisps had coalesced into a gauzy blanket that softened the light. Tiny flakes drifted down. Nothing heavy yet, just enough to blur edges and flatten contrast. The mountain was slowly pulling a curtain between all the eyes in play. Visibility wouldn't crash for a while, but it would get worse for everyone. She jogged on, breath tearing at her throat now, until she reached the base of the ridge she'd marked that morning. Up close, the slope's angle made her neck hurt to look at it. The rock face jutted out at mean, inconsistent angles, slabs crusted with ice, pockets filled with sugary snow that might or might not support boot. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, a slow, insistent drum. She planted her first crampon boot into a patch of frozen crust and pushed up. The climb was not graceful. There were places where the rock gave easy holds, where she could jam fingers into cracks, pull herself up, and find a little ledge for her toes. There were other places where she had to kick steps in untrustworthy snow, feeling it slump, and then hopefully catch under her weight. Her rope scraped, snagged, slid behind her. Once, her rifle swung out and bumped against the rock, making her wince like someone had struck a nerve. She did not look down more than she had to. When she did, the pass below looked like a toy battlefield, the vehicles matchbox small, the men tiny black dots flickering against white. Muzzle flashes were like camera flashes at a concert, here and gone too fast to anchor. Once, distant artillery from somewhere beyond the visible ridges sent a deep tremor through the mountain. It shook loose a curtain of snow from a cornice higher up. For a terrifying few seconds, a small avalanche poured down over her route, powder slamming into her back, making the world white noise and movement. Her fingers slipped. Her boot slid half off its purchase. Something small and vital tugged free from her vest, the rangefinder jerking on its tether. It dangled over empty air for a second, swinging, before slapping back against the rock as she snatched at it, hard in her throat. She pressed herself against the slope, panting, until the flow of snow thinned and passed. Her mouth tasted of crushed ice and copper. Slowly, she moved again. When she finally heaved herself onto the narrow ice shelf that marked the impossible angle ledge, her arms shook with fatigue. She lay there for a moment, chest pressed against the cold, cheek frozen to the snow, eyes closed. The battle noise had become a distant storm again, a constant rumble, an occasional crack instead of immediate concussion. Then she rolled on her side, shrugged the rifle around, and propped herself into a firing position. From here, the view was almost impossible to process all at once. To her left, the pass opened out like a diorama. Convoy, outpost, relay, men scurrying like frantic ants trying to lift impossible weights. To her right, the enemy's positions unfolded in tiers. Jammer, mortars, machine gun nests, reserve groups tucked behind outcrops waiting to move. And straight ahead, just slightly below this ledge, the blind gully ran like a secret artery, a shallow, hidden vein of movement. She set her damaged optic, peered through, and saw the war. The crack in the lens turned one quadrant of her view into a skewed world. Lines bent, distances lied. She took a breath, exhaled, and began to work out the difference. She picked a rock on a distant slope, walked rounds into it, watched where the impacts hit relative to her crosshairs, jotting a quick correction on the back of her glove in black marker. A shorthand only she understood. 2 clicks left, slight low hold at this range in this air. As she worked, she noticed new motion on the enemy's side. A group of climbers, smaller and lighter equipped than the assault teams, had begun moving along a different route, scrambling up a line of rock that pointed almost directly at her ledge. Their heads turned off and scanning. One of them carried optics, another had an antenna sticking up from his pack. They had seen the flashes from her previous hide. They'd realized someone up here was hurting them. Now, they were coming to stop it. She filed them in the back of her mind. Threat, yes. Immediate? Not yet. I returned to the jammer. A figure hunched over a compact console, gloved fingers dancing over keys and switches. Another squatted beside a rack of batteries, checking connections. A third stood, scanning the ridges with binoculars, headset down over his ears. Her first shot from this new perch would buy her the only thing she needed more than anything else, the ability to talk. She rested her cheek against the stock. The rifle felt like part of her again. Fatigue and fear settled into a background hum. Her breath steadied. She lined up the crosshairs on the jammer operator's chest, adjusted for her cracked optics lie, and began to squeeze. From down below, from the dugout where the general hunched over his map and cursed unreliable miracles, the movement of that one finger up on the ridge was invisible. All he knew was that his world was shrinking, options closing, and the one person who might be able to see the whole picture had gone quiet. Who was she targeting? He had demanded. He was about to find out.